Hi everyone, Michael from Mirrors of Consciousness and creator of the Orbifold Tarot with yet another part of the Orbifold Basics series. Just the last video we took a little detour into elemental dignities, which is a really important facet of understanding court cards. So now we're actually going to apply how to look at the dignities and see how those show up in the court. Before we do that, I'd like to introduce sort of a different way of looking at the court cards, which some of you have maybe heard me talking about, or, I'm sure I didn't make it up. It must be around there somewhere. A different way of looking at the court cards, which is the courts, all of their element being almost as though they're a 10 of the element. So all of the air courts are actually a 10 of air, and then it's as though a different ace, a different seed of another element, sorry, that's turned around, a different element, a different seed of another element has dropped down onto the 10 of air. So that with the ace and the 10 of air combined, we actually get the king of air, the ace on top of the 10. With the ace of fire dropped down on top of the 10 of air, we get the knight of air. Ace of fire on 10 of air. And so on down the list. The seed of water dropped into the 10, the completion of air is the queen of air. So the seed of water dropped on the 10. And finally, for the air courts, the seed of earth dropped into the completion of air, which is the page of air. And it would go so on, with the 10 being the base of each element and the ace being dropped on top or into the completion of the element. So it's the court cards can be seen not only as a combination of two elements, but they're not really an even, totally balanced combination of the elements. It's not like the ace of air and the ace of water are together. It's an imbalance. It's a maturity, a completion of a cycle of one element with the seed, the essence of the next cycle of another element. So with that kind of in mind, we'll go through each of the court cards, starting with air. So we have the king of air, which is air of air, seed of air dropped on or into the completion of air. So this is the best of both the completion of the element and the seed of the element, meaning that the king of air is someone who's very intellectual. It's all air, very intellectual, very thoughtful, very intelligent, wise, a good planner, all of the kind of, maybe has a sense of humor, is probably the quickest moving of all of the kings, or quickest thinking of all of the kings, because he's in his element. He's at home. He's the thinker. He's the planner, or she, of course. The courts are not gender specific. It can be she, and the same goes with the queens. Queens can always be men or women. So air of air is really both the culmination of air and what air represents, and the seed of air merged into one, combined into one. and the king of air is at home in the element. Then we have the knight of air, fire in air, or fire of air, as it's often said. So in traditional dignities, we have fire of air is dignified, well dignified, because fire and air get along together, as we talked about in the last video. This is a person who is very intellectual, is based in thought. They think quite a bit about things before they do things, but they're doers. They think before they act. They are they're intellectuals, but their actions are their thoughts lead to action. Their actions are the results of thought, and the proportion is more of a mind side, a mind aspect. So keep that in mind when we get to the King of Fire. So the Knight of Air is primarily going to be thought-based, because the Knight of Air is ruling over the air element, has completed the air cycle, and has some mastery over intellect, and uses that intellect in some kind of inspiring or driven way. It can be a very driven speaker, a very driven person who takes action. Sorry, my words are gone, obviously. I'm not either the Knight of Air or the King of Air right now. But I think an activist, that's what I wanted to say, an activist, so someone who really does stuff to get things done, but also does stuff that is well planned and has an intellectual base, has a well planned base, and a reasoned action, reasonable action. From there, we go to the Queen of Air, water in air, or water of air. And so again, we're still gonna, the theme is still there of an intellectual person, a reasoned person, a wise person, the maturity, the completion of an air cycle, very conscious, conscientious. But the Queen of Air is more concerned about how thoughts make her feel. What is the feeling of those thoughts, or the thought process is inspired primarily by sensation, by physical sensations, feelings, emotions, the intuitive side. So the Queen of Air is also very intuitive, but more on the conscious side of intuition, the more on the intellectual side of intuition. Her opposite, in a sense, is the King of Water, who, the King of Water is still going to be intellectual, but the intuitive side is actually going to be more dominant, and the conscious side, the air side, is going to be just a little less dominant. The Page of Air, next, is Earth of Air. So Earth within air, and it's a seed of Earth in the completion of the air cycle. So again, we still get that continuity of the completion of the air cycle, or some level of maturity over the air element and what the air element is a metaphor for, but with practicality. So now the Page of Air is less concerned about the thought realm and the planning realm and the ideas. The Page of Air is not the idea person necessarily. The Page of Air is more the person to figure out, okay, how do we take this idea and make it a reality? How do we put forth this idea into the world? How can we realize our our intentions. So the page of air is going to be much more practically rooted, practically based. And of the 4 air court cards, the page of air is probably going to be the slowest of them because of that earth element. The queen of air is going to be not as slow, but maybe we'll take some time to consider things. We'll take time to see how does it feel for her, rather than just acting right away on thoughts like the knight. So you see how the elements kind of combine and interact with each other, and they depend on the proportion. So next we have the fire court. So fire court, the common thread between all of the fire courts is going to be that they're all fire. They're all of action. They're all going to be concerned with action and doing things and drive and passion and will to some degree or another. The king of fire is going to have the passion and will to act on thought. Different than the knight of air. So you see the elements are the same, but the relationship, the combination is different. So the knight of air is going to be a doer who thinks about his actions. The king of air is going to be a thinker who then acts on those thoughts. It's subtle. It's a slight difference, but it's a significant difference. The knight of fire is fire in fire. So he is pure action. He's going to just act on impulse, act on will. He may get a lot done, may be very active and productive in that active way, but may also kind of waste a lot of energy, a lot of will, a lot of drive on things that don't really have any ground, don't have any root. It's just energy all over the place and bzz, 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 and activity all over the place. But a lot of that is actually in an imbalanced night, and it's not necessarily going to be an imbalanced night, but in an imbalanced night of fire, all that energy, or most of that energy, is going to go to waste. So possibly the thing for the Knight of Fire to learn is, how do I manage my energy so that the energy I expend and the actions I take carry the most impact, but I'm not also wasting. The being fire of fire, having no fuel from air, having no fuel from water or oil, and having no fuel from earth, the Knight of Fire can also burn out. So we see that a lot with people who are always on the go, always doing, going to this class, going to that class, going for a run in the morning, and then picking up the kids, and then working overtime, and bzz, 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 action. They burn out. Eventually, they burn out. And they may have a hot fire. They may be able to burn for a long time, but eventually they always burn out. So that's kind of the warning about the Knight of Fire. But there are times when you may need just fire, all that. You may need that. So it's not a bad card. I'm just saying that's the warning. And it can be really positive. It can be really great. Then we go to the Queen of Fire, and the Queen of Fire is also very active, doing things, but her activities are always kind of based in, how's this going to make me feel? So the Queen of Fire is often traditionally described as someone who's very sensual and possibly also sexual, sexually promiscuous or whatever, which I think that's kind of narrowing the definition a little bit too much. That may be true, but a little bit too narrow. I think it has to do a lot with traditional roles, gender roles, which is why I say that queens and kings and knights and pages can all be male or female. But when we have a sensual, traditionally, it's changing slowly now, but when we have a sensual woman who acts on her passions and her physical feelings and is very active in that way, she can often be seen in a negative light, or was traditionally. Whereas a man who acts on sensation, actually that's seen as a good thing, or had been seen as a good thing traditionally. So that's also a little bit of a warning with this card. Not a warning about what the card represents, but a warning about not narrowing the definition into that person that you're reading for, and limiting it that way. And even if it is limited in that way, what's so bad about it? It's, who cares? But it is beyond. It's much beyond that. It's that the Queen of Fire is sensual but very active, and she's the mix of feeling and action, but more so on the action side. More on the action side because it's fire. Fire is the ruling element. She's just the seed of emotion, the seed of sensation, the seed of also intuition. Of course, it's always intuition with water in action. So it may be a person who acts instinctively, intuitively on things, not out of reaction in the same way that the Knight of Fire might be. It's still considered, there's still some kind of basis for it further back in the subconscious. But the actions will be based on physical sensation. And the result, how is it going to make me feel? How is this action going to make me feel, is kind of the Queen of Fire's statement. Moving on to the, reversals, the Page of Fire. Again, very active. The running consistent theme through the Fire Court. They're all active. But the Page of Fire is going to be looking at how does this action, what results will this action produce? And the Page of Fire is also going to be a little bit more persistent in things. It's going to drive through, is going to carry through, and it carries that consistency of earth and takes that into fire, into the active realm. So the Page of Fire may not act so quickly necessarily as the other fire courts, but the Page of Earth will have more resilience and persistence in those actions, and maybe will not as easily be burned by acting and not seeing a result. The Page of Earth may be more careful about what actions he or she takes to produce results, but they'll be usually a little bit more consistent and a little bit more continuous in those actions that they take to produce results. And therefore they may actually get better results because they're more persistent and consistent in that relationship. So I hope that you are starting to see how the elements combine, how they interact with each other. But we'll continue on with the rest of the courts, the Water and Earth court cards, still going from King to Page. So the King of Water has a relationship, is similar to the Queen of Air, in that there's a combination of air and water elements. In this case, the King of Water is the seed of air contained within water. It's sometimes called air of water. And so, similar to the queen of air, the king of water combines the aspects of intuition and consciousness, of thought and feeling. But the king of water is more ruled by emotion and by intuition, and not as much by thought. Thought is kind of a background on the water element. The water element is more dominant than the air element. So the two elements are the same as with the Queen of Air. It's just a question of the proportions between the two. So Queen of Air is an emotional thinker, and the King of Water is a thinking feeler. So it's just a question of proportion there. Similar as we go on with the Knight of Water. So the same kind of relationship or similar kind of relationship with the Queen of Fire, where we said Queen of Fire was very sensual, very passionate, very much about action and feeling. How are these actions going to make me feel? Knight of Water is similar. He's thinking, how are these actions going to make me feel? But maybe before action, the Knight of Water is thinking of feeling first. So where Queen of Fire might go, how are these actions going to make me feel? The Knight of Water might go, how are these feelings going to make me act? So the feeling comes first, the action comes second. The action comes first, the feeling comes second. So it's that kind of interplay between the Queen of Fire and the Knight of Water, which are both fire and water. Here with the Knight of Water, fire contained within water. Then the Queen of Water is pretty simple to figure out. The Queen of Water is going to be water in water. So ruled by water and contained in water. The Queen of Water is very much the intuitive. She's emotionally mature. She's ruled by her emotions, and not just emotions, but feeling and sensation and intuition, and as Water of Water is going to be very changeable and very adaptable, good at absorbing things, very also associated with nourishment too. Nourishment is sometimes a little bit of an earth quality as well. It's a bit of a combination between earth and water. But the Queen of Water is Water of Water. All of the stuff that we know and understand about the water and water qualities is embodied in the Queen of Water. And then I was just talking about nourishment as water and earth. So the Page of Water is going to be earth contained within water. Again, the feeling aspect, the sensual aspect, the sensation and emotional aspect is going to be paramount with the Page of Water, but the Page of Water is a little bit more grounded in their emotions. They're more they experience their emotions. Their emotions are more a part of their being, a part of their ground, and they bring some practicality and persistence to their emotions and their sensual lives. And there's that aspect of water and earth combining to be nourishing. So there's earth contained in water. There's the minerals and the nutrients that are dissolved in water being transported through water for nourishment. I was just going to say something else about the page, but I forgot. Uh, so I'll leave it at that. But you're starting to get the idea on how the elements kind of interact, and they overlap in the core. They overlap, and the combinations of elements overlap very much, but they are still nonetheless quite individual. The proportions are different with each chord card. So finally we have the quartz of Earth. The King of Earth is a very practical thinker. Practicality is really the foundation of all of the Earth court cards. So the King of Earth is the thinker, the practical thinker, the person who thinks of solutions, worldly solutions, solutions that can be applicable to real world situations. The planner, maybe an urban planner is maybe a good occupation for the King of Earth, because they are very much thinking, well, what's the practicality of putting a traffic circle in this place? But their planning is very much planned and premeditated and conscious and intellectual, but the result is, how does this have real world application? The King of Earth is also going to be like the page, where's my page, of Air, is also going to be perhaps someone who gets more attached to their thoughts, with that idea of persistence and perseverance through thought. So again, there's that same elemental combination. It's just a question of the proportion. The page of Air is going to be a little bit more thought and mind oriented, but with the practical side. The King of Earth is going to be more practically oriented with wisdom, planning, intellect side. Our Knight of Earth is going to be, again, practical, but the actions of the Knight are going to be grounded in practicality. The Knight is thinking, what practical effect will this action have? So very traditionally, the Knight of Earth is considered one of the slowest acting knights. And that's possibly because of the earth element. It's maybe sometimes seen as a negative thing, because knights are supposed to act quickly. But sometimes acting quickly is not to everyone's best interest. Sometimes you want a knight who, yes, will act and will persevere in their action, but you want them to really be aware of what are the ramifications of this action. Maybe this action may seem right now, but the Knight of Earth will consider, will these actions yield a practical result? And if they're not going to yield a practical result, the Knight of Earth is not interested. The Knight of Fire might be, because they want to act just for the sake of acting. But the Knight of Earth is not going to be interested in something that doesn't yield some kind of practical result. Now, sometimes that can be a practical result that doesn't go anywhere because of the earth element, but it's still, there's positive and negative. It could be also a person who rarely acts, who doesn't do much, because they're too concerned with practicality, too concerned with what is going to be yielded from action, and so much so that they don't even act. So that could be a situation too. That would be depended on, again, as always, is the context, the querent, the questions, the other aspects of the situation, the other cards. If the Knight of Earth were coupled with the Page of Earth, which is coming up soon, which is even more Earth, then there may be too much Earth, too much grounding going on that nothing gets done. And again, we have this similar kind of elemental combination of earth and fire that we had with the Page of Fire. And again, it's a difference of proportion of the elements. So where the Page of Fire was practicality in action, an active person that thinks about practicality and maybe is grounded a little bit in their actions. The Knight of Earth is more practical and then act. What's the result? What's the base? What's the foundation here? And then from that foundation, how can I act? Whereas the Page of Fire is more, how can I act to create a good foundation? A slightly different proportion there. Queen of Earth, we again get this combination of nourishment, the idea that minerals are transported within the vehicle of liquid, of water, and the relationship, because the two elements of water and earth are a bit closer to each other, the difference between Page of Water and Queen of Earth is going to be a little bit less clear, a little bit more mergeable, more interchangeable than it would be for, say, oppositional elements, like our Knight of Earth and our Page of Fire. So, or other oppositional elements that we looked at. So these are more similar to each other in the same way that Knight and King of Fire and Knight of Air were. These two elements are kind of on the same side. They're much more similar. They're much more aligned with each other. They're similar to each other. So the Knight of Fire and the King of Air, Knight of Air and King of Fire, are the difference between the two is not as clear. They're a little bit more interchangeable. They are different. The proportions are different still, like all the other courts. But because air and fire are closer to each other, that differentiation is maybe not as stark. So that same idea of a less clear, less stark differentiation between Page of Water and Queen of Earth is present here. So Queen of Earth is going to be practical and just like all other Earth courts, but is going to be considering always, how does it feel? How are my feelings going to yield results? How does my stability affect my emotional state? How does perseverance enable me to be more sensitive? Those kind of relationships. So the Queen of Earth is definitely on the stable, practical side, but is softened, that stability is softened a bit by the water aspect. And then finally we have our last court, the Page of Earth, Earth in Earth. So this is the most practical of the, not only of the Earth courts, but also the most practical of the pages. And that's a great thing when we need practicality, when we need stability, when we need perseverance, when we need endurance, those aspects. but it can also, again, be negative because it can be too earthy, too grounded, almost anchored, tied to the earth, attached to the earth in such a way that nothing moves. So that can be a downfall of the page of Earth. So you see along the way that we've managed to have court cards. We have 4 court cards that are the rank in their element. So air of air, fire of fire, water of water, earth of earth, and they're most at home in their element, and they're like almost like a combination of the 10 of their element and the ace of their element. I said in an earlier video with regards to the numbers that you can think of the 10s as both a completion and a beginning, and the aces both as a beginning and a completion, because the seed of the ace is the result of the full fruition of the tree of the 10, the completion of the organism, the maturity of the organism as the 10. And the 10, because of its maturity, because of its completion, then contains the seed, contains the ace. So in the minors, we have that differentiation, that difference between the 10 and the ace and the 10. In the quartz, what we get is both. The background, the earth that is the page's element, the element that this particular page is on, that's the 10 of earth, and then the page is bringing the seed of earth with it. So it's almost like we have a 10 of earth and 1 of earth, an ace of earth, on top of each other. Here's the tree, or the completion of the organism, and then there's the seed contained within the completion. And so on through the rest of the quartz. You would have the completion of water, and it's so complete that it contains also the seed of water within it. The completion of fire, so complete that it also contains the seed of fire. And the 10 of air, so complete that it contains the seed of fire, of air. And so looking at it that way can actually, sometimes in playing card rankings, we would see the quartz as a rank 1 above 10, then 2 above 10, then 3. But I like to see the quartz more all as the same rank, the same level of person, but they just have different qualities. So they're all, in a sense, they're all an 11. They're all a 10 plus a 1. It's just that they're a 10 of one thing plus a 1 of maybe the same element or maybe a different element. In these quartz, I dropped 1, but in these quartz, they're the 10 of one element and the ace of the same element. In the rest of the quartz, they're the 10 of one element and the seed, the ace of the next element. So king of earth would be 10 of earth plus ace of air. I'll do all the earths, going back up the quartz. So 10 of earth plus ace of air, 10 of earth plus ace of fire, 10 of earth plus ace of water, 10 of water plus ace of air, 10 of water plus ace of fire. We already looked at the queen. The queen was 10 of water and ace of water, and the page is 10 of water, ace of earth. Fire quartz. You know, you're getting the pattern. 10 of fire and ace of air. The knight was 10 of fire, ace of fire, and queen is 10 of fire, ace of water, and page is 10 of fire, ace of earth. And finally, our air cards. We already looked at the king, which was 10 of air and ace of air. Knight is 10 of air with ace of fire. Queen is 10 of air with ace of water. And page is 10 of air with ace of earth. So the last aspect to look at, which I already more than hinted at with the court cards, is seeing the ace contained within each court. So when, if we take for instance the air court, then the air court is as though it's coming up out of the 10. We reach the 10, and then the 10 branches off. I think the tree analogy kind of works well here, because it's like a tree that's branching into these 4 different fruiting methods. And so we get the 10 going up into all 4 court cards of the air, but then the knight containing the seed of fire. So we're growing from air into fire, and the knight of air is kind of the transition between the air cycle and the fire cycle, which doesn't necessarily have to be 10 and ace. That's the way I'm explaining it, but it doesn't have to be. But certainly if we look at it in its purest form, that's what's going on. And then the queen branch is branching off into a water cycle. The page branch is branching off into an earth cycle. So each court is a bridge between the element they're ruling over and the element that is their rank. Of course, with our king, he's going into air again. He's continuing the air cycle. And that way, it's in a way these cycles are endless, in the same way that a tree goes to seed, and then the seed grows into a tree, and which goes to seed, which grows to a tree, which goes to seed, and so on. So that's just another way of thinking of court cards, with each of the court ranks really being the same level, the same value, but each being a different quality. So even across the rest of the courts, all 16 courts really are all the same value. They're all kind of 11s, 10 plus 1, but they're 10s of one, and they're 1s of something else, or in the case of the 4 at-home courts, the ace of the same. But they're that combination. They're in a way, they're bridge cards between one element and the next element. So start exploring how the elements interact with each other now, not only just among the minors, but now add the court cards into your 3 or 4 card practice readings to see how the elements interact with each other. And I'll do a couple for you now.